Good afternoon, guten Tag, meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren. Mein Name ist Jürgen Ronnthaler und ich bin der gegenwärtige Direktor des Zentrums für Lehrerbildung und Schulforschung der Universität Leipzig. Insofern freue ich mich sehr, dass ich eingeladen worden bin. Allerdings ist der Zweck der Einladung mehr, Frau Elspeth Jones, Professor Jones vorzustellen, und das hat mit meiner anderen Seite zu tun. Ich bin eigentlich von meiner Profession her Anglist und als englischer Literaturwissenschaftler kann ich natürlich auch etwas Englisch, und deswegen habe ich die Ehre, Frau Jones vorzustellen und die anschließende Diskussion nach ihrer Keynote zu moderieren, für den Fall, dass es doch den einen oder anderen vielleicht nicht ganz so klaren Satz in der einen oder anderen Sprache gibt, dann auch das zu übersetzen, wobei ich glaube, dass das kaum nötig sein wird. Ich möchte die Vorstellung sehr kurz halten. Ich denke, Sie konnten sich ja auch im Internet bereits über Professor Jones informieren. Internationalisation, das Thema der heutigen Keynote, scheint durch Ihr Leben durchzugehen, und zwar durch das Private ebenso wie das Berufliche. Privat, wie ich dem Internet entnommen habe, haben Sie sehr viel Zeit im Ausland verbracht, und zwar durch die ganze Welt. Also nach einem Studium in Deutschland sind Sie durch die europäischen und asiatischen Länder gereist und haben hier ihre Interessen in Sprachen, Literatur, Kultur ausgebaut und professionalisiert und waren dann mit dem British Council, wie ich gelesen habe, unter anderem in Japan, und haben dort, aber auch in anderen Ländern, in Singapur zum Beispiel, also in Asien hier auch, als Sprachtrainer, Sprachspezialist gearbeitet und haben in Tokio ein Sprachlernzentrum etabliert, also auch eine praktische Erfahrung in Bezug auf die Internationalisierung des Lehrens. Bis 2011 war Professor Jones an der Metropolitan University of Leeds angestellt, und zwar Internationalisation of Higher Education war der Gegenstand der Professur und des Lehrens, und sie war auch International Dean dieser Universität, die, wie ich gerade noch mal nachgefragt habe, jetzt umbenannt wurde in Leeds Beckett Universität. Also wenn Sie die beiden Namen finden, die mich verwirrt haben, das ist dann doch immer noch die gleiche Universität. Aber sie hat mir auch gesagt, dass sie eigentlich mit der Universität nichts mehr in dem Sinne zu tun hat, seitdem sie emeritiert wurde und international unterwegs ist in Lehre und Praxis. Und Sie sagten, Mailand war insbesondere oder ist insbesondere jetzt eine Universität, mit der Sie eng zusammenarbeiten. Die Publikationsliste oder die Publikationsaktivitäten von Professor Jones sind auch bemerkenswert. Ich habe mal gegoogelt, wie man das halt heute so macht, und habe gefunden, dass im sehr renommierten Routledge Verlag sie selbst 2010 ein Buch herausgegeben hat, Internationalisation and the Student's Voice, also auch diese Perspektive von unten versucht hat zu untersuchen, wo sie selbst auch einen Artikel publiziert hat in diesem Buch Don't Worry About the Worries, Transforming Lives Through International Volunteering. Das ist also eine Arbeit schon etwas älteren Datums, und im Augenblick ist sie der Editor einer Serie von Routledge Books zu Internationalisation in Higher Education, von dem also doch schon mehrere Bände 2015 erschienen sind. Sie können das nachlesen, ich möchte das jetzt hier nicht vorlesen alles, und wo auch 2 weitere Bände 2016 erscheinen werden. Einer Globalization and Internationalization und der andere Intercultural Competence in Higher Education, International Approaches, Assessments and Application. Insofern ist sie in einem weiten Kontext ausgewiesene Expertin, und wir freuen uns sehr, dass wir diesen Vortrag hören. Ich habe gehört, dass Sie gestern eine große Schwierigkeit, also gestern war ein schlechter Tag, nicht nur im weltpolitischen oder globalen Kontext, zumindest für die meisten Menschen, die ich kenne. Sie können sich vorstellen, dass man als Anglist natürlich auch die Amerikaner kennt, für die das ein schlechter Tag war, und nicht so sehr die anderen. Aber es ist, glaube ich, auch eine Frage von Internationalisierung, und da wollte ich eigentlich hin mit dieser Bemerkung, dass die Menschen, die Sie nicht kennen, dann doch eher sehr begrenzte Meinung haben, und in Leipzig und Dresden wissen wir das ja auch sehr leidvoll. sodass, oder in Sachsen insgesamt, sollte ich vielleicht sagen, sodass ich glaube, es ein ganz wunderbarer Beitrag ist, wenn Sie uns aus Ihren Erfahrungen berichten und wie ich dem Abstract entnommen habe, sich auch darauf konzentrieren, wo vielleicht auch die weniger finanziell gepufferten andocken können, nämlich die Frage von der Internationalisierung zu Hause an den Universitäten, an den Hochschulen. Ich freue mich ganz herzlich und begrüße Sie. Dankeschön.
Vielen Dank, Professor Rontaler. Ich werde trotzdem auf Englisch sprechen. Thank you very much, first of all, to the HDS.Forum for inviting me here. It's my first visit to Dresden, and unfortunately I did have a rather difficult day. 4 countries yesterday, so I arrived via the Netherlands and Switzerland in the end. It's quite exciting. Thank you also to Professor Sonntag for introducing the interesting work that's happening here. And I think you will find in my presentation many links back to what's been said here. And I particularly like the idea of Erfahrungsaustausches, which I think we can also turn into an internationalization opportunity as well. So we are in very interesting times, aren't we? And thank you for mentioning that. I think, again, also my friends, many of my friends, in fact everybody I know really, deeply depressed at the moment because of course we have the double whammy of Brexit before the US, and I've seen on Facebook that the US and the UK are fighting it out to see which is the most stupid country. So I think you can guess from that which side my views lie. Okay, so let's have a look at what we're going to talk about today. So this is the plan for my presentation. I'm not sure whether you can see very well at the back, but I will make sure that the slides are available for anybody who wants them afterwards. I'll make sure I give them as a PDF. And I should say, if anybody's using Twitter, my Twitter handle is @Elspeth Jones, and I was going to propose a hashtag HDS.Forum if anybody is using Twitter, so that we can all share the conversation. Anyway, so these are the things that I'm planning to talk about, and I hope it's in line with what it said in the program. In fact, it is in line because I've lifted it from there, so hopefully we're okay. But I'm going to begin by therefore talking about why is internationalization of the curriculum important. So here we are in Dresden. It's part of the country which I know is having some problems, and those problems are reflected, I think, now all around the world. We've seen it now in the US as well. When I said I was coming to Dresden, somebody from Bonn said to me, very beautiful city which has its problems, and I'm thinking, well, actually, sadly, my country inflicted lots of problems on this city as well. The UK has now inflicted problems upon itself. The US has, I think, almost certainly inflicted problems upon itself. And we're seeing a very, very uncomfortable moment, I think, in our time. So we've had 70 years without war in Europe, but I think we're facing very, very different times. And war in a different way, I suppose, is what we've got to think about. And so I thought I would start by showing what I think is a very nice quote from somebody that I think we're going to miss very much. So the possibility of common ground, I think we really need to be looking for this. And that was from Barack Obama in 2009 when he gave the commencement address at Notre Dame College. I think he's probably feeling exactly the same today, as are many other people. So in terms of the human side of our lives, the political side, the cosmopolitan side of our lives, I think internationalization is very important, but there are also other reasons. Here's another quote, and this is from Nita Temmerman from University World News in January. So we're all going to be working in a more globalized world, and we have people, we're working with people whose experiences will be very different from ours, and we need to face the fact that everybody will be working in an international environment, whether it's international, i.e. traveling abroad, or international and intercultural within the domestic context. And so we've got a human reason to think about internationalization. We've got, I think, then a professional reason to be thinking about internationalization. And I think there's a quality issue as well. This is from something of mine that's in press at the moment, but it's, if you don't have an international dimension in your curriculum in a university, I think there's a question as to whether the quality is going to be appropriate. So these are just three reasons why I think it's very, very important that we incorporate internationalization across all of our curricula, across all of our universities. So what do we mean by internationalization of the curriculum? And I'm guessing probably either you already have an idea or you've no idea, so you've come to find out, or you perhaps may be thinking something different from what I think about. And mine isn't the correct interpretation, by the way, but there are some misconceptions, so I wanted to start with these. Firstly, some people think it's all about getting as many students to go to other countries as is possible. And mobility is important, but we can't just send students to other countries and think that's what internationalization of the curriculum is. It's part of it, and it's a tool for internationalizing the curriculum. It's not everything. Delivering programs in English isn't enough. So if you have a very parochial curriculum and you change the language from one language to another, that doesn't change anything. So we must change the curriculum itself, and I'll come on to that later. The presence of international students, yes, fantastic, but we can't assume that just because there's somebody here from, I don't know, Mauritania and somebody here from Germany, suddenly they will understand each other and the world will be a better place. No, it doesn't happen as easily as that. We have to work at it all the time. So simply having international students in the classroom is not enough either, but it's a good tool. Same thing with teaching by international staff. We can bring in global perspectives and different viewpoints, but in itself it's not enough. And of course then people sometimes put curriculum internationalization over here in a module. Yes, I've got an internationalization module. Yes, but do all of your students follow that module? Usually no, it's an elective, it's a choice. So unless we're reaching all students, we're not really internationalizing the curriculum. International case studies and reading lists, again, very important, but not enough. So I don't know if there's anybody here from business, but for example, people from business sometimes say, well, all of our case studies are international. Business is by definition international. But unless we think about the case studies in a different way, even though we're bringing international case studies, we need to look at how somebody in another country or somebody from a different context would think about those case studies. So all of this is very good, but not quite enough. And most importantly, what it says at the bottom there is one size does not fit all. So what is internationalization of the curriculum in physics is not the same in business or in nursing or in education. Each discipline needs to think about internationalization in the way which is right for their discipline. Okay, so all these things are important, but tools in a way, especially these ones, tools for internationalizing the curriculum rather than in themselves internationalizing. And Betty Lesk, who is one of the great writers on internationalization of the curriculum, and I'm happy to say a good friend of mine, is some of the things that she says about an internationalized curriculum are important. So she says it will engage all students with internationally informed research, cultural and linguistic diversity. purposefully develop and assess students' international and intercultural perspectives and the learning outcomes. I'm going to come on to these later. And prepare all students for life and work in a globalized world, as well as looking different in different disciplines, as I've already said. And this is Betty's definition of internationalization of the curriculum from this book here, which, although it is in my series, I'm sorry to promote it in that way, it is a fantastic book. So if you're interested, please take a look. But this is the definition that she uses. So she talks about content, learning outcomes, assessment, teaching methods, and support services. So importantly, it's not only about academics, it's also about support staff and support services. So it's the whole curriculum. So I guess that brings us to the question then, what do we mean by curriculum? Because I'm saying internationalization of the whole curriculum as though we understand this. And generally speaking, I think we find that we talk about three dimensions of the curriculum. First, the formal assessed dimension, which is the syllabus and those things which we can see written down and we talk about in that way. And that's usually what people think of when they think of curriculum. But there's also the informal curriculum, the non-assessed element, and I'll give you some examples of this in a second, and the hidden curriculum, which is the most difficult side of it, because these are things that we usually forget about and we usually fail to consider. So it says, for example, whose knowledge is privileged when we design a curriculum, when we put together the syllabus. If we're putting it together only from our perspective and not thinking about the perspective from other cultures, then it's not necessarily going to be internationalized. Scheduling exams on feast days, for example, in different for different religions, and some academic examples I'll show you in a second. The informal curriculum, then, to just explain this briefly, it might be student mentoring or buddy programs, things around the restaurants and accommodation, how you offer accommodation to your incoming international students, for example, or how you mix people in residences. An interesting one here was that in my university, the manager of the university restaurants decided they were going to celebrate internationalization. And so he decided, he went to the internet, he looked up all of the national days of all of the countries that we had students from, and as far as possible, at that time it was 120 different nationalities, and he tried to celebrate the national day of each of those countries by bringing in some food from that region as far as they could, and people dressed up, and it was fantastic, and he just did this on his own. So that's part of what we call the informal curriculum. Celebrations, events, seminars, festivals. The Students' Union is very important, what they do. Clubs and societies, for example, the walking group, and some of our students put together what they called a culture club, like a book group. They had a monthly culture club with dancing and music and food from different countries. So these are all, none of these are assessed, but they all add up to an important element. So the flags, for example, that were hung around the campus were a visual sign that we had a very international campus. We had to make sure we didn't put Palestine and Israel together, or Taiwan and China. There are lots of things you've got to think about when you do something like this, but it's a great way of internationalizing the campus and having welcome signs in different languages, those kinds of things. These are all part of the informal curriculum. Creating a campus culture that celebrates and values cultural diversity. And the messages that are communicated by the university leadership are really, really important in this. And in a way, because it's the whole campus, everybody can have a role to play in this. So that's what we mean by informal curriculum. Does this ring any bells with people? You're all sitting there very politely. Is this okay? Yeah? All right then. So I'm going to move on to just a few examples of the hidden curriculum. When we write essays, certainly in the UK, and I think typically in Western Europe, the style is to introduce give the main body of your argument, and then have a conclusion, I think. Is that how you'd understand it? Well, it's not like that, for example, in West Africa, where there's all this argument that may come through first and then the conclusions at the end. And I must say that when I first read an essay from somebody with this kind of approach, I found it very, very challenging. And I asked him, I said, this does not fit what we expect in terms of an academic essay. And he said, well, it's perfectly standard in my country. He'd already he was a postgraduate student. He said, this is what we do, this is how we do it. And so we had just assumed that that style was standard, and of course it isn't. So we've got to help our students to understand what we expect in our academic tradition. Very important. What about this? Grading, marking. In Germany, when a student gets their assignment back, what do you give them? Do you give a mark A, B, C? 1, 2, 3. 1 to 5, right, okay. Well, in the UK, we mark out of 100%. But that's the theory, because in fact, we mark between 40% and 70%, okay? And if you get 40%, you pass, and you can get higher grades if you get a distinction and so on. And if you hit 70%, you're effectively a genius, okay? Now, this is not easy when we do Erasmus exchanges around Europe, and those of you who've been involved in Erasmus will know this. And not just in Europe, but in Australia, in the States, in other countries, it's very, very tricky. Because the other thing is that in the UK, D is distinction, whereas in other countries, A, B, C, D is really bad. For us, D is a distinction. Fantastic, that's really good. In France, they mark out of 20. In Australia, they will use the full range, the full percentage range. So it's very difficult when somebody comes to see you and says, look, I worked really hard on this assignment. I've got 49%. Well, yes, that's very good. You've passed. No. I'm a student who usually gets 65% in China, for example. I get 65%. Well, but these are things which are hidden curriculum, and we really must focus on much more than we do. Okay, so I'm coming on to my next question now. And we're focusing much more in terms of the formal curriculum now, rather than the informal and the hidden. So what, if mobility is one of those tools, or internationalization at home is a tool for internationalizing the curriculum, how does it fit? Now here, I'm sorry it's a bit difficult to see at the back probably, but down at the bottom we've got internationalization of the formal curriculum here. And for me, the two key elements of that are global perspectives and intercultural competence. And I'm going to come on to both of those in a second. But if you look at across the top here, knowledge, skills, and attitudes to be developed, I hope you notice that I've done a two-way arrow. And this is very important because they're not just one-way elements. Students have the possibility of contributing their knowledge, skills, and attitudes, and adding to the values and knowledge that go on in the classroom as well. And I'm sure this is not something that's unusual to you, but I think we don't perhaps focus enough on this. And we don't take advantage of the diversity in our classrooms. And I'm going to come on to this again, and I'm going to bring that back to the Erfahrungsaustausches, because this is really what we've got in a slightly different way. It's not just students meeting casually, but in the classroom we have many experiences. We have many different diverse values and understandings that we can bring to what goes on in the classroom. So it's very important that we think about it in those ways. So let me first of all explain what I mean by global perspectives. Here, we mean across the whole curriculum, not just that elective module over there, but really thinking about the whole curriculum. We're not simply talking about mobility. Again, in my country, we tend not to be very good at languages. I will not say we are not good at languages, because some of us are, and not myself, some people are really, really brilliant. But we tend not to always speak other languages as well as we should. And therefore, and plus the rest of the world likes to speak English, so obviously we get more people coming into the UK than going out. And the government is trying to meet the European target of 20% mobility by 2020. I guess that's the same for your universities, or you may already have exceeded it. But if we reach the target, which is a big if, we've still got 80% of the students who will not have a mobility experience. And so with the internationalization of the curriculum, this element, the global perspectives, need to be available for 100% of the students, not simply those who get to study abroad or work abroad. But it's important to recognize that that mobility may be a tool for developing global perspectives. So I'm not decrying mobility, it's very important, but it's one element. In terms of what global perspectives mean in an internationalized curriculum, it depends very much on the discipline. Going back to what I said earlier, that it's different in different disciplines. So it may be to do with cultural background, influencing values and actions. It might be professional, cultural, national understandings, cultural dominance, questions of cultural dominance, as I said, sustainability. I learned a new word as well. It's nachhaltig, is that right? Sustainability and global impact, and ethical and environmental issues, or even cultural considerations in professional practice, even for those people who never work abroad. So bearing in mind all of this is for all students, even those who will not eventually work abroad or have an experience abroad. In terms of intercultural competence then, what I mean by this is the ability to work effectively across cultures, not simply knowledge about a single culture. So if you're a French specialist, knowing all about 18th century French literature and so on, being able to communicate about what's going on in France, because sometimes if you speak the language, you get so used to speaking the language and being able to make yourself understood that you don't necessarily think about other people who don't speak that language. You need to be able to communicate across cultures and operate effectively in that way. The idea of exposing students and ourselves to otherness is a very important element here in terms of internationalization at home in particular, and thinking about culture as not being always international. I'm going to come on to this. Making the familiar seem strange. If anybody's studied ethnography, this is a very common tool in anthropology, ethnographic questioning techniques, making things that you've seen this every day of your lives, just looking at it in a different way and thinking differently about it. Challenging our own identities, values, assumptions, and stereotypes in order for us to be able to challenge those of our students as well. And learning about cultural others and seeing the world from their perspective, so seeing things in the way that they see them, or trying to understand those different perspectives. And I think we're all trying to do that right now, I think, with some of those American voters. So internationalization at home, I've mentioned. I'm just going to show you this definition, which Jos Balin and I came up with. And I think there's some important words here, so I'm going to highlight them. First of all, it's a purposeful integration of international and intercultural dimensions. It won't just happen by chance. We've got to incorporate it into the curriculum. But it's into the formal and the informal curriculum, because they're the things that we can have some control over. We need to work at the hidden curriculum, but this is where we need to incorporate the internationalization elements. And it's for all students, very important, and it's within domestic learning environments. So it doesn't just mean in the classroom or in the home university, but it's using the diversity in the local population and in the local context, as well as what the university can offer. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about that? I'm aware that it's quite warm in here, isn't it? Now, yeah.
What do you mean by culture?
Exactly. Thank you for the question.
Is there maybe
Yeah, I'm going to come on to this because I think we need to keep a very big understanding of the word culture. And there was a very interesting paper called Small Cultures by Adrian Holiday in 1999, where he says that cultures can arise anywhere that people gather together. So that's an interesting idea, but I'm going to give you some examples in a second. But in terms of the idea of domestic learning environments being lots of different aspects of the domestic context, i.e. within your city or within your country, that's what we mean here. Are we okay? So Jack Meziroff, who is he's into experiential learning, he says that the reason why international experiences are so good for transforming our understanding or helping us to understand things differently is because of these things that he calls disorienting dilemmas, that they can help us change our mindsets. Now, I don't know if that's a word that you've come across before, the disorienting dilemmas, things, your little challenges, little problems that you face when you go to other countries. And they can be really, really small. And the example I always give, and people always seem to agree with me, is that when you get the bus in another country or tram, sometimes the train, but usually train's easier, but the bus is very, very difficult because until you go there, you don't know whether you've got, you buy the ticket before you get on, whether you pay the person as you get on, do you get on the front door or the back door? And until you've got used to being somewhere, this is a small but important disorienting dilemma. In fact, when I came in from the airport yesterday, fortunately, I had a very, very nice lady who came to inspect my ticket because she said I was traveling ohne gültiges Ausweis, and because I hadn't, I'm not sure what the word is in German, I know what it is in French, but where you, thank you, I hadn't done the Entwerten before I got on the train. And she was really sweet, and I said, I've never been here before, I'm so sorry, I really didn't understand. She said, well, next time look for the brown box, and so on. So here we were. I was about to be fined 60 euros, but it was a really nice lady, and she was very kind, and she clearly realized it was my first time in Dresden, and she was really nice, so thank you very much to that lady. But these are disorienting dilemmas that we face, and you know, I regard myself as fairly well-traveled, and I still make mistakes all the time. So the question is, how can we recreate those disorienting dilemmas in a domestic context? And this comes back to the question, what do we mean by culture? So the idea that we can get this kind of transformative learning, not only through international engagement, but through encounters with cultural otherness of any kind. And I'll give you then some examples. So for example, I know in Germany you've been very welcoming to refugees and asylum seekers, so you have many people in different parts of the country that you could think about as being from different cultures, but again, it's a kind of international context. The way we worked with refugees and asylum seekers, we had some students who volunteered to help them learn better English, help them apply for jobs, help them deal with things like how to go to the bank and all of those things. So that we had lots of people volunteering with them, but we also then incorporated them into various educational practices in different ways. So there's one example, still national difference. Faith or migrant communities, again, quite often these will be certainly the faith communities may well be different international contexts as well, but obviously increasingly we have people from many different religions within our domestic situation, especially in cities. How about then working with disabled people? Here's an alternative culture. So this is not an international situation. We formed a partnership with a home for disabled people. We had different students from different disciplines working with them. So some in terms of education, some in terms of physiotherapy, some in terms of play work. And so using that alternative cultural context, we were able to help create these disorienting dilemmas, because if you yourself are not disabled, or you know somebody who is severely disabled, You may not have encountered this kind of culture before, and you may not necessarily know how to deal with it very well, and it could create these disorienting dilemmas for you. By exposing students to these opportunities, we could incorporate this into the curriculum. Other examples, similar examples, I'll go through more quickly, to do with drug addiction or alcohol abuse, to do with women's refuges or homes for children who'd lost their parents, what we call looked after children. And so all of these, if you do not have this experience of these contexts and these cultures in the broadest sense, you may find it quite challenging to deal with these things. Are you with me on this, or are you're not going to, I'm happy to answer questions at the end anyway. Okay, so this is what we found. We found it very helpful. Okay, so using that broad concept of culture as a teaching resource is very important, because we're thinking already about domestic and international students and staff and academics. We've got, in many situations, a multicultural classroom context. We may have returning students, going back to that question of mobility, so bringing their experience back into the classroom and engaging with culture in all those different varieties in the local society. So we've got lots of opportunities here to think of culture as a teaching resource and not simply thinking about international all the time. So in a way, it's kind of interculturalization rather than internationalization, but it's too difficult a word for people to say. So, okay. And just because we've got mobile students doesn't mean we can assume they will go away and come back and everything's fine, because we need to actually think about the role of the period abroad and how we make the most of this by, first of all, preparing students very well. We need to also review and review what they've been doing when they return and feed back into the curriculum so that all students benefit from it. And what's been found to be particularly helpful is this final element, which is the kind of ethnographic questioning while the students are actually in the other country. What are you learning? And give us an example of what you've found. How has your mindset been changed about this, that, and the other? So there's some very interesting literature on all of this, which I'm happy to tell you about if you're interested in that. But certainly we know that students get a lot from these overseas experiences, and here are some of the intercultural competence skills which I found in my research, which students develop through this period abroad. And as well as that, they also develop employability skills. So going back to my earlier slide where I said the international dimension is very valuable for their future working. And these transferable skills are sometimes they're sometimes employability, sometimes transferable, and the Erasmus Impact Study calls them transversal skills, and they found that in 2014, 92% of employers are looking for those kinds of transversal skills. And in many cases, they're not so interested in the actual subject of study. They're more interested in what the students can do afterwards. So we know that mobility is developing these skills. Study after study is showing this. It's not just my research, it's coming up again and again. So it's very, very important that we recognize that. And we need to think about how we then bring it back into the curriculum to help. So is it the international element, or is it the experiential learning side of it? And I don't think we know the answer to that yet. I guess you're familiar with the experiential learning cycle that Kolb and others have talked about. And it's important to bear in mind that the experience could be the key. So, what factors do we need to bring in? We're now on my fourth question here. What are the factors which can help us to build that sustainable approach in the formal curriculum? And my view is that these are the four things that we've really got to try to work on if we're going to be successful. We need to embed learning outcomes. I'm going to give you some examples in a second. We need to think about the appropriate pedagogy to deliver the learning outcomes, and of course the assessment to show us that the students have achieved those learning outcomes. But very importantly, we also need to support the academic staff in order to help them do all of this. So we must not forget the importance of that. Now, in terms of intended learning outcomes, I want to explain what I mean by them and give you some examples, because again, we may not share the same idea of what learning outcomes mean. They are really crucial in the curriculum, because it's certainly in the UK and many other countries, they are the building blocks and the starting point for the curriculum. And therefore, if we focus on internationalizing the learning outcomes, that will help us to incorporate internationalization across the curriculum, because it will hopefully tell us what students can do, because the assessment will tell us if they can do that. Okay, so this is how we use learning outcomes in the UK. Is this similar in your universities? Do you use learning outcomes in this way? No? Okay, well, let's show you. I'll show you some examples and see what you think. So this came from a study that we did, some work that we did in the university. The learning outcome beforehand was like this. And so we suggested, a group of us got together from across the university, and we suggested that basically it's exactly the same, but they add in a multicultural society. Okay, does this look like what you would understand as a learning outcome? You're not looking very sure. No? Okay. What we do is we describe learning, we describe what the students will be able to do at the end of each module. And that's what I mean by a learning outcome. So the student will be able to debate the ethical responsibilities of science in society with reference to current issues. That would be what the discipline area wants the students to be able to do at the end of that module. Yeah? And then the assessment follows. Now, we suggested that if they add this very short thing here, that would immediately get them thinking differently, because it would really focus on the fact that they're living in a multicultural society. Okay? And the second one, professional, ethical, and legal issues relevant to the environment of their discipline. Well, we added in the word global, because it's not just about what's going on in your city or your country, but it's about what's happening in the global professional environment. Okay? Just give you some more examples. This was from sports science. List components of fitness and evaluate their contribution with appropriate reference to issues of race, gender, and cultural context. Again, it makes clear that we're in an environment where not everybody looks the same or has the same kind of physiology or whatever. Yeah? And the final one, review the role of the organization within the changing context of the wider sector, but it's within the changing local and global contexts. So, how would you then articulate this in your situation? Would you have something like this that says what the students can do at the end? Maybe not worded like this, but that's what I'm talking about, that whatever you use, we call them learning outcomes, whatever you use to say what the student will be able to do at the end is the vehicle for creating this internationalized curriculum, because it means that you can change them to give them a globalized sense. And we need to scaffold it so that the first year, the second year, the third year, and so on, challenge the students further. And we also need to think about how it's going to be assessed. So here are some examples. Okay, so you'll have copies of this anyway, so you can see it in more detail, because importantly, the role of the academic then in all of this is to create those challenging intercultural learning opportunities to enhance that global citizenship and the intercultural competence and the employability, which is appropriate to the discipline, appropriate to the students. And the learning outcomes will help to see whether they've achieved it, and the assessment will show us. And this will then reach the whole of the student body. So the idea is not to have, going back to what I said earlier, you don't have a module over there, but you change what you've already got. Okay. Now, we're running out of time, so I'm going to go through this quite quickly because we've got here, Jos Balen and Betty Lesk and I came up with these 6 key enablers for supporting our staff through to internationalize their curriculum. So how can staff be supported? First of all, that agreeing why internationalization of the curricula is important for that discipline is absolutely crucial. It needs to focus on all students and all programs. We need to get the right people involved, focus on outcomes, not inputs, and guide reflection and discussion and support the academic staff. So I've got some further detail on all of these. Understanding and agreeing why internationalization of the curriculum is important, the context that the students will work in, and solving the big problems of the world is going to be absolutely crucial to have that intercultural approach. Getting the right people in, the focusing on all students and the whole programs means that all students will get access, not simply the few who take part in mobility programs, and we need to incorporate it right into the basic learning outcomes for the discipline. Using key academic staff who are interested and want to take this forward is very important. And the role of the International Office needs to be questioned here. Again, it's different in different universities, so we need to always think about what that means. Thinking about the outcomes, not the inputs, connecting it with assessment and seeing that develop over time. And I think that over time point is very important because, as Professor Sonntag said, this is not going to happen next week or next year. It will take a long time for all of this to happen. Guiding reflection and discussion, helping the academics to think about internationalization of the curriculum in their discipline. And Betty Lesk's website has got a very interesting series of questions. She calls it a questionnaire on internationalization of the curriculum, which you can use for discussion with academic staff to see what it means to them. So that's a very useful thing. And then supporting academic staff, because understanding that it's a very complex and continuous process and so on is really, really important. And we need leaders at different levels across the university, because the vision of the university and the policy can block this or can be really supportive if we want it to be. So here are just a few tools that we can use as well. I've mentioned some of these before, but they're all tools for helping to internationalize the curriculum. We need to think about exploring local diversity as a resource, as I said. So this is summarizing the opportunities that I've mentioned. And of course, thinking about virtual mobility. So some people are involved in various interesting digital approaches to internationalization. And partly, you may have heard of this collaborative online international learning group, but using our international partners to help with this, very, very important. And finally, I just want to focus again, this is something that I wrote, but really, really important, that an internationalization strategy that doesn't give attention to the leadership and development of staff is unlikely to achieve its aims. So my key point really is make sure that we get the staff involved, and I hope you're the right people to be saying this to. Okay, so my plan for today was to do those 5 things and talk about those 5 areas. I hope I've done that. And I'm very happy to answer any questions, and we'll leave the slides with you, but thank you for that.
Ich glaube, ich spreche in Ihrer aller Namen, wenn wir Professor Jones sehr herzlich danken für diese grundsätzlichen wie auch sehr konkreten Ausführungen zur Internationalisierung. Und ich spare mir jetzt aus Zeitgründen, das in Englisch nochmal zu wiederholen. Ich denke, es ist ein sehr reicher und vielfältiger Strauß gewesen, den Sie uns vorgestellt haben. Und vielleicht könnten wir die Fragen, die wir jetzt in einer relativ kurzen Zeit, weil die Workshops um 15 Uhr beginnen sollen, noch stellen können, ein wenig bündeln, damit es nicht so durcheinander geht. Und ich würde vielleicht mal anknüpfen an die Frage Kultur, Culture. Wer möchte vielleicht zu diesem Gebiet Multiculturalism, Transcultural Values, Fragen an Frau Jones stellen, wie man damit umgeht im Internationalisierungsprozess? Das ist vielleicht auch ein sehr weites Feld, so weites Feld Culture is a way of life, wie Raymond Williams gesagt hat, trifft es uns zu sehr. Dann versuche ich mal was anderes, um ein bisschen Ihnen die Möglichkeit zu geben, vielfältigere Dinge hineinzubringen. Ich weiß nicht, ob es Ihnen so geht wie mir. Das Hauptproblem ist nicht, dies alles einzusehen, sondern mit den ja immer mehr, sagen wir mal, formalisierenden Strukturen unserer Ausbildungseinrichtung umzugehen. Was Sie hier vorschlagen, ist ja im Wesentlichen eine Differenzierung der Ausbildung, die noch einen höheren Grad erreicht als die Differenz, die unsere eigenen Native Students schon haben. Welche Erfahrungen haben Sie denn gemacht, mit diesen Prozessen dagegen zu arbeiten? Which experiences do you have in working against formalization?
Well, my experience, if I go back to the importance of engaging the academic staff, because if you're faced with a group of academics, there will be a certain number who are very happy to help, very interested. These may be the early adopters, if you've heard that word. They will be excited and they'll be with you. And that may be, if you're lucky, 10 to 15% of the people. And over there, I'm not pointing at anybody, I'm pointing at that space in the middle, you may have some dinosaurs, some people who really will never change, and you really don't want to involve them because there's nothing you will do to change their minds. And so forget those people. And the key thing is this group in the middle, and use the people who are early adopters, who are going to be champions of the subject, to help change the mind of these people in the middle. And that was one of the first things that I learned, and that had the most important influence on me, because if you're going to try and do anything, you can't do it alone. You've got to have that group of people with you. And in order to make it systematic, in order to do the kinds of things I've talked about there, we used, instead of working with individual faculties or subjects, we used a group from across the university. And we showed them the module descriptions from different subjects. So business, health, nursing, education, they looked at each other's descriptions. And so they were able to say, why is that international? Or how could you incorporate something that was more international into what you're doing? And instead of just always talking to ourselves, it's good to get that external view and then bring those suggestions back into the group of champions in that subject. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Andere Fragen, bitte schön.
For me, it seems very familiar to the systemic organizational development theory too. And coming from there, I normally know that an organization is not able to change only such huge things only coming from inside. Normally, if you want to have such a systemic change, you would need somebody coming from outside. Is this your experience too, or what kind of advice you could give us?
Well, I think there are different experiences from that point of view. In some universities, I know some universities in Australia where actually it's been quite a small group of people in an individual discipline, and they've decided to do something for their students, and that's worked really well. And then other people got interested. And then in other cases where it's been a more, as you say, systemic university-wide initiative, and they're ones that I've been involved with myself. And that's either driven by the university management or something else. And the something else might be quality assurance. So in the UK we have what's called a quality assurance agency, And if they are focusing on anything, they will, that becomes important for the university. Unfortunately, they have only so far focused on international students. They haven't focused on internationalization of the curriculum to any great degree. So, but I know that in some countries, they are doing that. They are focusing on internationalization of the curriculum, and so that gives you that external pressure as well. So you're absolutely right, but I think it works differently in different institutions.
Dankeschön. Andere Fragen vielleicht im Kontext auch der, was ja ein sehr zentrales Thema war, der Internationalisierung at home, zu Hause, also an den einzelnen Hochschulen, an den einzelnen Institutionen. Ich merke schon so, dass ein bisschen in Boxen packen klappt nicht so. Machen wir es insgesamt ab. Herr Hobbs, jetzt.
So, Professor Jones, thanks very lot for your very big lecture you did here. I'm interested in one, if it's necessary maybe to guide internationalization by via a top-down strategy, or is it something which must grow? Last year I did a study visit at the University of Illinois in Chicago, and they did something very interesting. They said we do not talk about internationalization because United States are everywhere, but our issue is diversity. Mm-hmm. And they did it like this. They demanded all faculties within a 2 years period to include in every model description the term diversity. If it is biochemistry, engineering, whatever. And this and the situation was that all the faculties, not all, but most of it, were very confused about it. And then they begin to discuss about it, and finally, it was something like a guideline. It's now a guideline of the university. Maybe next guideline will be called trumpety instead of diversity. We don't know, but they did it really by a very tough and strict top-down process. Is this possible with internationalization as well?
It's a very interesting question, and I'm glad you raised it, because one of the problems is, well, coming back to the specifics of an American context, the universities I visited in the States seem to find it difficult to consider the black population and the Hispanic population in terms of all of these challenges for internationalization. They seem to think of internationalization as being something outside the United States, that we don't have that, the diversity within the US, as you've just said, whereas in fact, of course, they do. And it's a reflection, I think, of universities when they organize themselves. We're very good, aren't we, at naming departments, and it's all top down, and it's all, they do this, they do that, they do that. And the problem is that internationalization, if it is going to be effective strategically at university level, it needs to be everywhere. And so we can't have one department concerned with equity and diversity or whatever you're saying, but quite often we do find that. So the responsibility for equality and diversity is often in this department here, even though it may be spreading across the curriculum, but they see themselves as very different from the people dealing with internationalization. And the people who deal with the curriculum quite often don't realize they must be speaking to the international office. And so our vertical structures really work against talking about all of these things as basically the same issue. We need to be thinking about the diverse population, whether it's international students, local students from different backgrounds, or indeed people who've more recently come into the country. It's all part of the same issue. We need to be thinking about the curriculum which will make it easy for people to access, whether they are international, they speak the language of the university or not. Now, I think the strategic question you ask, I think if a university decides to take that route, it can be done. And we were in the early stages of doing that, when unfortunately our Vice-Chancellor changed and we got a new one who was only interested in student recruitment. So it's about the support from the university to make it happen. The way we did it, I've tried to explain it a little bit here, but I think the top-down element can only be a framework, because the real work has to happen in the disciplines. And we need to work across the university, not in these silos, I call them. But thank you for the question, it's a really good one.
Andere Fragen?
Thank you. Still, I want to ask my question on culture again. What do you think about the notion of academic culture in difference to other cultures? And saying this, it's also my question, is it more about interculturalization of curriculum? Because within one nation we have different cultures, and I'm also thinking of the social backgrounds of students. So for example, when you come from a family where no one has studied before, then you don't know anything maybe about studying.
Absolutely.
And then it's maybe some new experience for the whole family to go abroad. And in other families, it's usual.
Or just to go to the university, yeah.
There's also the effect that people from academic families just behave academic because it's usual, but there are also a lot of students that don't have the experience before.
You're absolutely right. I've just written a paper on this. It's going to be published in 2017. It's the and I think we call it the transition to university, and it's actually a transition to different levels of education generally, I think. And you're right. Some of the issues that are faced by the people who are first in their family to go to university, even in their own country, are very, very similar. And all of this is another reason why we need to have that sort of cross-university discussion. The academic cultures, I think, and I really want to use the plural, because each discipline has its own culture, each university has its own culture, and each country has its own academic culture. So the diversity within academic cultures is enormous. And you know, if you, I don't know what discipline you're from, but I can be pretty sure that if you were in a different university, the culture would be very slightly different. I think anybody who's moved from one university to another will know that. And certainly if you were in the same discipline in a different country and in a different university there. So we tend to think of an academic culture, and it's not at all. So we always need to help our students to make that transition into whatever culture, the academic culture in our university, in our discipline, in this country, all of those different factors.
Ich sehe noch eine Frage von ganz hinten und im Interesse der Zeit, Frau Badikow.
Yes, hi. In the beginning, wow. At the beginning you talked about Trumpism and Brexit for a little bit, and I wonder, to me it seems that Brexit, Trumpism and everything that we see in Central Europe is, as a friend of mine put it, a kind of revolt against a neoliberal anarcho-capitalism, in a way, but the wrong kind of revolt. And I'm wondering whether all these developments will also have effects on the internationalization of the curriculum, university life. Did you or have you had experiences so far after Brexit that go into these directions?
It's not after Brexit, we haven't left. It's after the referendum. I'm still hoping sense will prevail, you know, so we haven't left, we're still with you. I personally have not had bad experiences, but there are so many people in my country who've had terrible experiences, and the sort of anti-immigration, the racism, the xenophobia, it's just been awful. And our leading Brexit man, the horrendous Nigel Farage, yesterday was talking about post-Brexit values, and we have not got post-Brexit values. We haven't changed. There was only 35% of the population that voted to leave the European Union, and I don't think most of them didn't even know what the European Union was, let's be fair. They were voting for something completely different, as you say. It's a reaction to whatever they see wrong. And don't forget, we had the global financial crisis in 2008. And I think people are still struggling from that, and I think people are still struggling from not having... perhaps some people have been out of work for a long time, and what worries me the most is what we call scapegoating. I don't know if you know that word, where it's blaming a certain group of people for something that goes wrong. And in our case, it's people coming from other parts of the world, and I think this is a real problem. In the States, it seems to be an anti-establishment vote, and I think we're in a very complex time where all of these things are changing, and I think we've got to be really careful. In Germany, you don't need to be told how this can develop when you've had a situation where, dreadful austerity, financial issues, followed by then a strong leader who comes and talks about all of these things. I mean, there's so many parallels with Donald Trump. It's really frightening. I think it's really frightening. And so all I can do is keep talking about what I talk about and say international education, the liberalization of our mindset to being more open to these things is one way forward. It's one of the things that we can keep doing. And we can't just hide in a corner because all of those people at the moment have got a bigger voice. We have to keep with our values and our concerns and stick with what we think is right and pass that on to our students and try and get them to have a more open mindset as well. So I can't tell you what it was like in the UK on the 24th of June. I had a friend who came to my house and just burst into tears. He said, I just had to come and cry on somebody's shoulder who would understand how I feel. It was just awful. Yeah, and I'm sure those Americans, a lot of Americans are feeling the same.
I'm pretty sure of that, and not only the Americans. I think there are a lot of people all over the world who feel exactly that. But as you said, to feel as a stranger in one way or the other is certainly helping to prevent
absolutely.
Mistakes. Das ist jetzt nicht unbedingt ein schönes Schlusswort für den Moment.
No.
Die Zeit zwingt uns leider hier aufzuhören mit der Diskussion. Ich bin sicher, Professor Jones beantwortet Fragen und möchte mit Ihnen diskutieren und weiterreden im Verlaufe des heutigen Tages. Ich danke Ihnen ganz herzlich für Ihr Interesse und Ihre Fragen und ganz besonders Ihnen fürs Herkommen und uns mit Ihren vielfältigen Anregungen zu bereichern.
Vielen Dank.
Dankeschön.
Dankeschön.